All right, let's talk about chunking like a chess master. When you're trying to solve problems and when you're looking at some kind of situation, maybe it's in the workplace or you are trying to solve one of those metaphorical or literal treasures, or you're actually in a gameplay or something like that, there's a skill that many of us overlook when we're novices in an area. But if you see how an expert actually works, you notice that they have a skill that helps them to think at a level one, two, three, four, five levels higher than other people, than novices. And I'm sure there are probably domains in your life right now where you do this, and you may not even recognize that you're doing it. But if you'd stop, and as you think about this video and the things I'm going to tell you in a moment, you will notice that you're doing it in some areas. And so part of what I'm going to suggest in this video is that you can use that. You can take this skill that you're already using in some areas, and you can apply it to new areas to be better at solving problems, seeing solutions, seeing opportunities that other people miss. So I talked about chunking like a chess master, and here's where it comes from. It goes from a study that goes all the way back to the 1970s, where they found that chess masters remember far more positions because they group information into meaningful chunks, not necessarily because they have a better, like, natural raw memory. And there have been studies of this in other areas as well. So, for example, they've done studies about how to remember numbers. And if you have to remember just a list of individual single-digit numbers, and you just learn them in a long list, if you actually chunk them into groups of numbers, you're going to be able to remember a larger volume of numbers. And that's true in other domains when you're trying to chunk things around logical information. So, here are 5 ways that you can apply this concept to solving those literal and metaphorical treasures, to solving problems, discovering those literal and metaphorical treasures, to all sorts of areas of our lives. The first one is to practice grouping information. So when you're looking at some kind of domain, no matter what it is, try to combine it into meaningful sets, meaningful categories. Look for the patterns, the things that they have in common. And you can play around with it because there are sometimes more than one way. There's often more than one way to organize things. You can put them into different kinds of categories. Now, some domains, they're very, very logical. Like if you work on cars, you understand that you have all of the things that are related to the transmission, all the things that are related to the suspension. And so there are logical categories and chunks. Like if someone asks a novice about a car and they don't know where to start, well, one of the reasons why a mechanic is able to identify problems, and of course we now have technology and sensors and things like that, but they can often narrow down sort of the symptoms, right? The whatever's happening to different domains or areas. So they will go through all the things that are related to one part of the car, one category, and work their way through that, and then they'll go to the next one. And they have organized things in their head, so they're not just going through the list of every single part in the car randomly. They have it in these meaningful categories. And that is something that the more conscious we become about that in different domains of learning and in life, the more effective we can be. We can start thinking at these higher levels. We can hold more information in our mind at the same time and kind of compare and contrast. And that becomes really, really useful, really powerful. All right, so grouping information, practicing grouping information. And related to that, I mean, these are kind of related, but look for patterns, look for recurring structures. Experts rely on pattern chunking skills. So they are organizing, pieces in certain ways based upon patterns, like on a chessboard, or if you're in a game, you're organizing things based upon some logical patterns that really hold up, and that over time you find that those patterns are especially useful. So you look for those patterns, you organize things around those patterns. So usually the patterns come first, and then you can kind of chunk them into those patterns. But both of those really closely related but distinct, really valuable skills. The third one is to actually practice this with puzzles. There have been studies to show that particular kinds of games like Sudoku and crossword puzzles and some memory games, if you try to practice chunking skills when you're playing those games, it can help you strengthen your ability to use chunking skills in other areas beyond that gameplay. So it is what we would call a transferable skill. Now, you have to learn it anew in each domain because there are different kinds of patterns, but just the ability to notice patterns and to think about chunking as a strategy, if you use it in gameplay, then it's going to be more front of mind when you're in other environments also. So that's a helpful one. So grouping information, using patterns, practicing with some existing kinds of puzzles. And then teaching. So this is one that I've used because I have been a teacher for many, many years, a classroom teacher. I spent 12 years in middle and high school before I went to the university level. I've taught grades 6 all the way through advising doctoral students on their dissertations. And so whenever I am teaching something to someone, I'm having to look at the information and I have to organize it in ways that make sense for the students, that is understandable, that they can digest, they can get their head around, that can help them see it in new ways. And that's when I am teaching and I'm preparing my lessons, I am engaging in this activity of organizing. So one thing that you can do is when you're in some kind of domain and you want to try to look at it another level, imagine that you're a teacher and that you're going to prepare a lesson to teach this to someone else, to teach what you've done so far, where you are so far. And in the process of kind of mentally preparing, you can even sketch it out like a lesson. How would you organize your lesson and why? And sort of challenge yourself. You'll notice that you will start to use this pattern recognition and this chunking in the process of planning to teach something. So it's a great little strategy, not just for teachers, but for anyone. You don't have to be a great teacher, but it will help you develop the skills of pattern recognition. And of course, it will help you become a better teacher and communicator to others also. And then the last one is to sort of practice these skills across different areas. So when you are going through your life, recognize that pretty much anything that is made by humans, there are patterns to be looked for and identified. Anything in nature, there are laws of nature and there are patterns that are at work. So teach yourself to look for patterns. Teach yourself to look for logical ways that things can be chunked and they can be organized. So engage in sort of a lifelong pursuit of putting things into different categories and moving them around. Now, keep in mind, though, that sometimes things can be categorized in more than one way. So you don't want to get too narrow in your thinking so that you organize everything into these categories and only think about them in terms of those categories. You might want to actually put them in categories and then pull them out. Try to think about it in a different way, a different domain. So for example, if you're going on a walk and you're enjoying nature, you can think about the patterns and the categories that biologists would use. But then you could shift and you could think about the patterns and the categories that an artist might use to make sense of what's going on in terms of color and shading and texture and other things like that. So you can play around with different kinds of patterns and see what it helps you to notice that you didn't notice otherwise. So chunking is an incredibly powerful skill. It's something that I think we should actually teach young people more intentionally. Not just, we teach it sometimes in a given subject. We'll try to identify the patterns and we chunk things, but to teach someone this as a thinking skill, to realize that you can practice and learn to identify patterns and to chunk and categorize things, and that can help you solve problems and create new solutions that others didn't think of. That's something I think we miss, and I think we can all work on it. So I hope this video helps you do that.